do this for partner. So I just okay.
Thank you very much. Now we have Ines Jim. She Arab State Union. She will bring the taking Arab world.
Dear ladies, my name is Indi, and the Arab State Union. For who don't ask, who is the professional of public and TV theaters in East and African region. I to an idea the new technology that our members using or using in the future to enhance TV program. More radio same and that caption programs. Currently, author experience show them currently can receive news information, albums and songs. Some voices that can even experience worse. Members started several years ago, have running and reached 50 years. In implement Indonesia, Emirates, like in or Jordan. Members seriously move radio broadcasting Saudi. ASBU that is recommends members to use content. That's content sense. Artificial call it the next year. It's cheaper bandwidth development is making to deliver business benefit. Creation is also appealing that it's a proud stage allow higher reach by transition from a particular to several brands and a wider audience. For social media, logistics can the processing content useful platforms. It can offer assistance assessing information quality, extraction, help through a large archive, storage sites, and assist repurposing. AI is really promising. It's right now how best enhancements in common and can be deployed on cloud platform. Indeed, there's a large range that allow exchange of news with member organizations. The platform is in GitHub is and it allows to send different TV programs not only between members but with international other international broadcasters and broadcaster units and EB. So we consider additional services that use some intelligence allows better use of content exactly our members. Finally, it's easier done. They know about that. How our members who are using these technologies make better use of to enhance their learning. Okay, so in this industry, we move to 5D production. This is we produce content on platform. This then creates digital production between screen-enabled has been helping us transition to IP-based. Right now, more content storage is stored as hard disk and shared as deployed with SDI between associated domains and for most important to our member open audio and well-established AS and for video. The capture enrichment to be easy and repair multiple. We need technologies and sound to speed management. Academy within our is training asset studios 5 management. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So what the technology and we ask for any the whole range from one tick and the for enhanced production. Move on to the Samantha and third. So we are in this area.
Thank you. Good presentation. I just wanted to say I took some time to tour and stories through the old, beautiful art, historical site and their rich life, light and empathy. And the media we use about explaining these stories, for reality can reach to life. I can figure this. So just ourselves, we recognise Campo about innovation space. Years have been doing VR space and essentially create us with them. And I'll just play it about the sort of. Could you play? Augmented reality. I kind of wanted to quickly, look at, I got it from a technical storyteller to us. So, bandage off everyone's between types of reality got available in augmented reality. It's a real world with graphics, game on go. Familiar with augmented reality, it uses a phone device to. And then there's virtual sense of the world that typically grace content. You're going to hear reality, augmented reality, but your real world is items are. Through VR as well. Sort of VR, you can bring to life through. We also a lot of graphic overlays, special overlays, sort of more of. I think there's a lot of potential in a lot of. And then there's projection, augmented or video or similar surfaces, but a surface, a stories. This figures are a little old, but and this were augmented by 2000. You can see that you're much bigger, essentially, in the glass. And, definitely not reality being worse by. And that spread as a big thing, but content to make sure is really keen on board to the people to engage. Really wanted to do storytelling and reality and just what you can do both of those media. AR seems to work probably the best. Looking through a device spend, looking through that meant into your bite very much like they were sort of that you can enter with that content. Might work really well with AR. You can create interactive build as a often have you been how long by for storytelling as well. It works really well bringing articles and grey experience, something that was what happened in the United States. Really useful thing. So we were showcasing walking to bring to life, around and mountain and historical. So and type of story set, I guess the special editions, 3D, all of it to life for your user. The story available to make augmented reality is extraordinary. And also environments. So this, bringing things to maintain. What is the thing is to enhancing materials that we stories that we might. So in VR, so experience looking towards is get on you one-on-one. At the same time, negative. That's is your you've got for it's however long, and they're there. No other just immersive in content. Yeah, and all just as important. Sound really music. We've to because we've gone around through. So what action in areas, or you mentioned back to it a lot. So games or experience. So we call a lean, essentially like a move back, and you watch. Instead of last sit in there, sit on for interact, and you can lend your biggest drivers that it creates. Really put shoes like you're there, immersed in with headphones, have the real. Really create that whatever story. I think the thing that 360 video plonked down and create impossible and film. Not to forget that put people on the great audience really quickly. How to create look out, being true and rememberly video than just situation and 10-15 in there. Put story create and is graphics than a threads. Then it's video by narrative and graphic. Marketing piece authentic, important for any and not what life and think about what you perceive when they've got with anything that uses reacts. I think the last people have from VR. There's a novel. It's also in seconds, surrounded by 3 experience. If there's no hook for so long, I often go VR like it. You get the right engagement of experience. The content through VR. So making an experience with all. You can have just remembering the compromise it's got all. You've got the visual right, and then those in. If so VRs are really important. As I said before, but what you've study's been done much more memorably to remember. And if you can, it's so on for it's becoming more, and you'll see a lot of experiences and being an empathy for people and show your way of living. There's another, and I think VR experience that. I thought a lot of be dead and is that you're actually seeing the experience, the travel experience or film, not necessarily so add and put people with experience, make them they may we've had experiences how people with autism feel. It won't be exact, but there are invoke. That's it.
Thank you. We have, please, Yamana. We're just hearing technology quality of people. We can hear him from the common person and what we are looking
Hello, Yuji Yamana. I'm of engineering at department in China or 8K contents. This is his policy, corporate, some part of it, 4K in the next 3 years. We said at 2020 Olympics for that 8K exhibition, then fact, then 4K histories, culture, and other important pictures. And map of a vision that started in 5. HK has been contents 4K vision family, and we did such as or upcoming 2003 games. Talk about experiment doing the the 2006, and this is pictures and put the on display. We have a key broadcasting day from channel of the broadcast hosting. Which was long, and channel 7 or 8K shows the ITD and entering talks is the 8K have all the action to coding and out and trans satellites to the broadcasting or stations. That's the production station, like 3K audio track, one more is, and we also more than cameras used for and editing, and 2 more, and all 22 production raw 2 and other. We have KS of K content. It's a display. We have a big ones have so a lot of 8K in the market, and we are sheet type because so we have the room. It's very small, large size. This important for Japanese reason why sheet type. Next, to contents we have been released, and this is most of them know the essence of UHDTV, but I just briefly explain. So what's that are? First, of the resolution, the 8K image format is 16 times better than 2K HD format, and 4 times the resolution of 4K format, and and color system is we have adopted the wider color gamut, and the wide color gamut is specified in ITU AL BT 2020, and it can reproduce more vivid colors than conventional BT 709. And high frame rate, it gives you higher image quality, especially in quicker moving scene like sports contents. And 8K broadcasting supports 60p now, but we may take 120 in the future. And HDR, of course, expands the range of brightness, so it can reproduce dark area and highlighted areas. And such 8K broadcasting supports hybrid to low gamma or HLG as a HDR system. And more. So audio is 22.2 multi stereo channel. So we are broadcasting for 8K contents. This slide shows the many different kinds of 8K contents we have already produced. NHK thinks making good contents is one of the most important parts for 8K to get more popularity. And 4K is, we have been producing a variety of programs in the past few years and keep doing it, like dramas, sports, music, and art, nature, cultures. And 4K is originally comes from the cinema industry, but 8K is originally developed as a TV technology. So we are looking for contents that best match 8K. And we think sports life is one of the key contents. That's why we cover the many different types of sports events like Olympics or World Cups. Promoting 8K in addition to 4K is one of the most important roles for NHK as a broadcaster. This is the short trailers of the 8K contents, which is Antarctica, the frozen time capsule. Of course, this is 2K, so it's down-converted pictures, but originally it's on-aired 8K satellite channels in March. And this is a and Antarctica, the place which preserved the Earth 3 billion years ago, we captured only one super view in the world with 8K. And this lake under the ice is it's the first time for human being. Only 5 people have already reached this place ever. Well, the crew got all the way to the lake from Tokyo via London, Cape Town by cargo plane, and 8 hours ride of snowmobile to that lake. And it took 4 days drilling to make 4-meter long deep tunnels to reach the lake. The temperature in the water was below 0 degrees. And they brought, our crew brought 2 red 8K cameras to film the extreme place where for a long time people had been rejected to access. And no water vapor or dust in atmosphere. That makes it possible to film the crystal clear sky or sceneries, or even the very small bacteria, which we have never seen before. And I think 8K is definitely the ideal technology to film those kind of special places. And we also have a lot of the promotions and exhibitions and presentations, like CeBIT in March 2017 in Germany, IBC in Amsterdam, MIPCOM October 2017 in France, Interb November 2017 in Japan, NAB last month in the United States. Then we meet a lot of people from manufacturers or productions and talk about selling or buying contents of 8K or future co-productions. And this is the article of the local magazines while MIPCOM was held in Cannes, France. And this picture, this guy is the NHK CTO, Mr. Chigano. He told about the future collaboration of 8K contents and also the upcoming plan of 8K caravan in Europe. So we're gonna send our OB truck, which called SHC2, and it leaves Moscow after the Russia World Cup, and then 10 months trip in Europe, covering contents, theaters, arts, cultures, etc. in Europe. And even 8K lives are gonna be planned in December. Then we are now testing the satellite transmissions with satellite broadcasters. Okay. And this is the Olympic Games, the technology progress with the Olympic Games. And this is the Pyeongchang Olympics diagrams. And this is the IBC in Olympics, 4K MCL, and then camera venues. And we did a public viewing in Japan. What time? Oh, how much left? How much left? Okay. So we also have the another contents for. It's a observation cameras to watch the volcanoes. Then 4K HDL pictures can show the details of the the volcanoes and rocks scattered and smoking rises. That's very quite useful for news clips. And VR is for watching the disaster areas of great earthquakes, and some people can't return to their homes because of the nuclear reactors accident. And then they can see the VR pictures of 8K, so with the goggle, and see what happens now in their hometown. And this is a medical experiment, and so we also have a lot of applications with 8K, with medical, this is the 8K box camera, and just show the IPS cells with 8K. Then if we trim and magnify the picture, so we still can see the details of the cells. Then that's one of the good application with 8K contents, we think. Then we still have a lot of hurdles, or we have a lot of to do. So to make the 2002 Olympic successful, then more contents, more ideas, more resources are needed. Then NHK welcomes our partners to promote 8K together. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Yamana. It's quite interesting about what we see 8K pictures. Yeah, so we have nearly we are exceeding our time, but we can quickly have Mr. Ankur, and I can take the liberty with him to stick to maybe 5 minutes if you can. Mr. Ankur represents Prime Focus, which is a content creating company and technology company.
Thank you, George. Always coming towards the end, this is the challenge. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Delegates who've come from outside, welcome to India. I'll try my best to do this in 5 minutes, sir. Topic today was very interesting. I think, Sinha Saab started the session by saying, let the mind think a lot. Let's think beyond. My session focuses more on wiring the mind and seeing, can we do more with this, right? Can we look at things which the mind has, thought, but it's not visible outside, and can we bring it into storytelling? So I think that's what we're looking at. From a topic coverage perspective, I had a lot of topics to choose from. Purposely, I chose these 3 topics. The first one I thought is about the workflow itself. So you shoot a content, you shoot a story, but if you're not able to post-produce it properly, if you're not able to finish the story in a well-done manner, then the story is not, a good story can be a bad story, right? So we are saying, let's control the workflow of the digital story, the production itself, the post-production itself. The second topic I want to cover is on the artificial intelligence. Some of my fellow panelists have spoken about it. I want to give a different perspective to it. And the third topic is blockchain. You've created a content. The content is getting pirated. That's a big thing. And is a new technology like a blockchain, can it be used to kind of prevent some of those? So I'll try to restrict each of these, but I'll give you a very brief idea given the restriction of time here. So today, if you look at the workflow, the content is shot at a location, and then all the activities are done in a sequential manner, right from creating multiple copies of the content, right from bringing the content to a post-production location where you do the final post-production. So a lot of challenges in this. One, the metadata, which was captured, and then one of my colleagues, panelists here, did speak about the importance of metadata. So one of the issues is that sometimes the metadata which is core and captured at the location at the time of shooting is just lost. And that is such an important one in the storytelling context that tomorrow when you kind of look at creating a content out of this and distributing it to multiple channels, that metadata can be a big differentiator. Similarly, because you create copies of content, you are building inefficiencies in the whole system. And also in terms of quality, so you're shooting in 8K or 4K, but the fact is today most of the post-production happens in 2K. And your resolution is lost. I mean, that is what the bulk of the industry is today. So how can you preserve this content metadata right from the source to the end result, which is the final product, is what this workflow talks about. So what we did was we brought in something called as a digital lab, and we just simply changed the workflow. And in this, basically what we are saying is that when you're creating a content, when you're shooting a content, let us try to sequentialize the whole thing. Instead of sequentializing, let us try to virtualize the content and do these things in parallel. If metadata is there right at the source, can we leverage the metadata and make quick decisions and influence the shooting again, influence the production again? So if we are able to do this, and today at the back of people talking about 5G, 4G, internet is becoming more and more real, people are having access to bandwidths, and these things are becoming more and more accessible. So we believe as the world progresses towards a more connected world, there will be such a workflow in existence. Today, as we speak, these are real workflows. These are implemented at some broadcasters. These are implemented to create some films. And some of the big ones in India have been using these workflows. So we had a technology which is called Clear. We have this technology which basically uses to orchestrate it. I'll not talk much about it. I'll leave this slide here. But basically what it is, this whole story of content storytelling is about orchestration of this content right from the source, not losing any content, any metadata, and being able to post-produce it effectively so that we are able to get the final result, which has a lot of enriched content and the metadata both. The second point is more on artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, today media is disrupted by this. Everybody, today we were at NAB, IBC, any conference you go to, the conference is not complete without artificial intelligence as a word. Now, fact is, if you look at the real world stories, right? So Morgan is the trailer, which is a scary movie, I think a lot of us would know that, was created, the trailer was created not by people, but by machine learning. So IBM used artificial intelligence to create the trailer out of this, and what came out was a fantastic trailer. So the endeavor here is that can we replace human minds with machines, train the machines enough so that the stories which come out of it are more immersive, more inclusive, more engaging. And hence, what you do to shoot a content, to produce a content, you get better ROIs on those content. You look at, Paralympics, you look at Olympics today, all the promos are being created using machines. And imagine this, sports or live event, you have fraction of seconds to create these stories. Because the event is happening, the goals are happening, boundaries are being scored, and now you have to create a story out of it in a fraction of a second and show it to your viewers. All this will not be possible without the machine learning part of it. The next point I move is more on video cognition. Sinha have again brought this point. There is a lot of content which is in the video itself. And today machines are empowered to read this content and make some sense out of it. So when you're training the machine to kind of know this more content more and more, you'll be surprised with the kind of, from the same story, you can derive multiple smaller stories, and this will enhance the experience of the main story. And this is something which, a cognition, which is video discovery, a discovery from a particular video is basically helping us do that. I have some examples. I will try to quickly run through them, not taking too much of time on each. But the first one is a promo creation. So if you look at, a traditional way of creating promos today, you will have a piece of content. There will be some people who will be going through the content. They will be deciding which part of the content needs to be used for promo creation. and then they will be finally creating the promo by bringing it onto the NLE. The idea here is that you replace people with machines, right? And and of course, I must admit to this audience that this is not completely matured. We cannot rely on this 100% today. But the fact is, even if you're able to achieve efficiencies of 30%, 40%, multiply that by the number of promos you create or number of stories you generate, you will have that much efficiencies. Now, for a broadcaster, NHK was here, there are many more in this room. I think the number of promos we create, the number of stories we generate out of the main story, this is simply fantastic. These are real examples. We do this on a day-to-day basis. And there are products, there are softwares in the market which actually are able to generate this data online. Second one is, today everyone is talking about subtitling, closed captioning. These are becoming statutorily more and more important. The governments are doing a lot so that, more people can understand the content, and hence this is becoming a reality. Now, if there is so much content, then it's humanly impossible to do it manually. And hence, this is another area where we thought that if you have to make the story more understanding, let more and more people understand the story, machines can again help here, and technology can help. So imagine, the audio being converted to text, and now text being converted into multiple languages. So this is, let's say, subtitling or closed captioning for you, where you are able to generate these kind of text in multiple languages right from the content, again, with minimal human interaction there. So what we have seen is, if it is a documentary content, the accuracies are in the range of 95 to 96%, sometimes 100% if it is English to English. If it is GEC content, we see that the accuracy goes above 60, 65, 70% at best. And then these deteriorate with the kind of languages we try to look at. But Google's and Microsoft's of the world are putting in enough and more resources, manpowers behind these so that these will become a reality. The solutions, what we are showing here, are real solutions. They are existing today. So these are not futuristic. But what happens is, with these technologies, the storytelling enhances beyond what we can look at. Compliance. I think many broadcasters face this. Today we have a content which is being generated for a particular region, and that content travels across boundaries. Each boundary, each geography has its own compliance, has its own statutory norms. So imagine that you are now able to do a quick compliance check, do a quick refining and adhere to the new compliance in a fraction of a minute, fraction of a actual time which you would take otherwise doing it manually. So this is another use case which we believe will be able to take those stories to multiple different geographies and be compliant to those geographies. Sports I did talk about. Now you create a highlight packages. I mean, sports today, I would say, is the most expensive content, right? So when you look at the promo creations, when you look at the way storytelling is done on sports, again, it's another good use case which we can use technology for creating multiple stories.
You can wind up. I think we're running short of time.
I think this is my last slide. So here, what we are looking at is contextual ads. All of us face with the challenge that, yes, you have created a good story, but how do you monetize it? And I think monetizing is a factor of one, good story. Also, second is, how do you give new avenues to the advertisers to be able to generate more revenue out of the same story? And if you are able to do contextualization of the ads and the content, then the story becomes more monetizable. So this is the third, this is my last point on last use case, for example, on AI, where you identify the content, identify places in the content where you can insert advertisements, and use the ad engines to get the right ads, insert them in the content. Last piece is about blockchain. I think this is a big one. So 2020, the estimated losses are about 50 plus billion from the content we create. So yes, while all of us are focusing on creating good stories and using technologies to create good stories, I think one more perspective is that, can we use technology to prevent piracies and protect these good stories? So I had a slide on blockchain and some points, but I'm not going to cover this in detail. But yes, I think there are initial advances which have been made on blockchain as a technology, which can help prevent piracies. There are some baby steps taken, but happy to discuss that in detail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Just covering this. Sorry for
thank you for, we gave you a very little time, but very interesting part of it. So lastly, we have Mr. Amitabh, and, he's heading a very big network. But you can say a few words about what you're doing across the world as being part of Z Network and SL World.
Yeah, hello everyone. Unfortunately, I don't have a presentation, and I think it is just as well because you have gone through the entire appetite for presentations probably this morning. In Z Network, today we have about 50 channels which are being broadcast in India, and almost 150 channels which go globally to more than 200 countries. Basically, we are a content company and we are a storytelling company. And I'm telling you the story in the same way as it used to be told by old people in front of fire, where children used to be sitting for a long time. Of course, we don't have that kind of time here. Basically, we as a network have been focusing on the aspirations of people, on what they wish to achieve, what are the things they are fighting against, and what exactly is that they want to achieve in their lives. And every part of our serials in different languages are different, and they portray these stories by media, which is today visual, but may not be so advanced to include 4K or 8K technologies. Of course, those are on the agenda as we go ahead, but the basic principle of storytelling remains to be able to transport people into a different world where they forget about the daily lives and they reach a domain where they live a different character. They live the life of a character, and this is what is making the network possible to reach in different countries. Like everybody, we also want to be the Netflix of storytelling. And we have seen that, visual is the medium, like Instagram. It has grown from 60 million to maybe 900 million over 3 to 4 years because of the visual content. And the way the social media is now getting involved into stories is something which is very exciting, and that is the way things are changing. Today, I just want to present to you three different directions of technology which are important and which will be important as you go ahead. Apart from 4K, 8K, virtual reality and augmented reality and so on. The first one is file casting. It used to be earlier called podcasting, and it was in a very simplistic format. But believe me or not, in the next 2 to 3 years, the streaming is going to be replaced with file casting. Today you have got devices which are 64 gigabytes, each phone or whatever device. They are going to grow to 256 or even more. And there is no need to be connected to a network to continuously stream either a movie or a story or a serial or whatever. What you need to, with the new generation networks coming, with 5G, with the kind of speeds you have, once you connect to a source, the whole story or the serial or the movie will get downloaded, and it will be there in your device to watch as you wish. And that is called the file casting. The file of 1 gigabyte gets delivered in a few seconds, and you watch it. So there is no need to connect to streaming networks, and this is what you are going to see in the next 2 to 3 years. There is already a file casting association, and it is moving ahead. So watch out for this technology of file casting. It is going to replace all other current broadcasting technologies. The cloud is a very misused term because people want to be in the cloud for cost savings and so on, but actually that is not so. It might save some costs, but the reality of the cloud is that once the content is in the cloud, It can appear in different formats and in different avatars, as you might call it, with people working on it, maybe startups working on it, and delivering to different networks like community networks, colleges, to gaming networks, to social media, and so on. So the same thing gets transformed, and that is the beauty of the cloud, and that is why we don't look at the cloud, so to say, in a way to save the costs, but we want that to become the innovation engine for content, for people who are not like us, who are youngsters, to work on it and create something which is totally, which will raise your hairs in the days to come. And finally, the digital world, which is today confused in different ways, but basically, we are talking about connected devices and mobiles, and that world is still unexplored to a great extent. And we believe that, as we go along, this is going to change the way things are going to be depicted. Whether it's going to be able to cope with virtual reality or not, I'm not able to say at the moment, but digital is going to take, along with file casting, the whole dimension to a different format. So because of the paucity of time, I'll end here, but just remember these 3 points. You're going to see them happening, unfold over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are not left with any time. We have already eaten up into the coffee time. So I would leave it to you, Mr. Karma.
Thank you, sir. Just quickly call across Mr. K.G. Suresh, Director General, IIMC, to give away the mementos, to thank our esteemed panelists, starting with Mr. N.K. Sinha, Secretary, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. Mr. Yuji Yamaha, Senior Manager, NHK Japan. Mr. Yuji Yamaha, Senior Manager, NHK Japan. Ms. Samantha Ramalu, Managing Director, Method Digital. Ankur Jain, Business Head, Prime Focus. Ines Jibali, Head Production and Operation Department, ASBU. Mr. Gordon Gu, CEO, Adino, China. And Mr. Amitabh Kumar, President, Technical, Z Network. And finally, Mr. George Kuruvilla, Chairman and Managing Director, PCIL. Just a quick, we'll just take a quick picture with all the esteemed panelists. We are completely over time, so would request you all to grab your coffee and come back quickly, because the session is going to go live on Doordarshan, so request you to come back, say, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Friday, 11th May 2018. Greetings from the Taj Diplomatic Enclave, New Delhi. And welcome to day 2 of the 15th Asia Media Summit. This is the hall for the plenary session, and gathered here are the distinguished delegates from Asia and across the globe. In this plenary session, the topic is, it's a joint session on telling compelling stories, challenges and opportunities, radio and community radio.
Challenges and opportunities. The topic is a wide one. As journalists, we all want our stories to be compelling. We want the audience to feel compelled to watch, listen and read what we produce. We think what we report and produce is amazing, and we strongly believe our societies need our trusted stories. But there's a lot that gets in the way of our stories reaching the audience, and we are facing new challenges, from the sheer volume of content that's available through traditional media and the newer social media platforms, to changing audience habits, to the well-documented loss of trust in established structures. What we see as editing can be perceived as, by an audience seeking transparency and authenticity, as filtering information. Add into this the perceived rise in so-called fake news, filter bubbles where people stumble less upon views that challenge them, and a sense from some quarters of society that traditional media are just not telling their stories. We see a very complex environment. But like any challenges, this moment presents opportunities, and that's what we want to explore today. Joining me is a very distinguished and experienced panel from journalists, academics, and also representatives from community radio. So we have, I'll take you through the panel, Mr. F. Shaheriar, Director General of All India Radio, Paula Slayer, Middle East Bureau Chief of RT, Shahidul Alam, photographer and founder of the Pathshala South Asia Institute in Bangladesh, Dr. Sridhar Ramamurthy, former director of the Commonwealth Educational Media Centre for Asia and a community radio practitioner, and Dr. Ramachandran, Associate Professor in the School of Communications at Taylor's University in Malaysia. So I'm hoping that we can model the topic today in our approach to the session, and that's making it as compelling as possible for you, the audience, by including debate and discussion and leaving lots of time for questions from the audience. So we've got a mix and match approach. Some of our panellists will be doing a very short introduction, and we do have a couple of presentations. My general question to each member of the panel is, how important is compelling storytelling and what gets in the way of it? So we're going to hand over firstly to Mr. Shaheriar, from the Director General of All India Radio.
Thank you, Sarah Gibson. Thank you also for giving me a warning before this session that you'll be giving me a signal after 7th minute, so that I have to condense my presentation. I'll try to do that. When I was asked to speak on compelling stories, I immediately referred to the ancient religious philosophies of India, where we have seen that different eras of human history have been divided into Satyug, Dwaparyug, Kalyug, et al. What does all this mean? It means that there was an era when truth was respected and stories were embedded and woven in a manner that only truth was disseminated. Then the other yug, that's the era, came when things were slightly different. Then the Kalyug, which is the yug, the era that we are in now, where we have now approached a time which is now known as post-truth. That means truth perhaps is vanishing, and sensationalization is becoming a hot cake in the market of media persons and the media industry across the world. Immediately after this, I thought of understanding a reality about the subject that I have been given today to speak and deliberate with you. I expect questions from you because your questions will make me wiser if I am able to answer them. Compelling seems to be carrying with it an element of forcibly accomplishing something and thus has somewhat negative connotations. However, as civilizational and cultural journeys progress, many words and expressions undergo subtle and sometimes not so subtle changes in the immediate and interpretative meanings. A compulsion needs to come from unwelcome power structure only. There could be and are compulsions of love, of duty, of conscience, of justice, even of compassion, to name a few. However, in the media scenario, when we talk of desirable compulsions, those we spring from and are fashioned by a happy confluence of content and presentation are the most desirable and constitute what are called compelling stories. The content has to be relevant and truthful and meant for larger public good in the context of public service broadcasting. The presentation styles are usually decided by the intrinsic nature of the content as also the target audience. But innovation is a key element in today's fast-paced existence. But the bottom line for a true compelling story would be the capacity to grab and sustain the attention, capture the imagination, and impart something of enduring value. This perhaps implies that for a compelling story, it is not important that the story is based on truth. I have made certain slides, and I would like to just rush through them before we start discussion on this. There is a difference between a public service broadcaster or a public radio or public television and a commercial radio and a commercial television. In commercial radio and commercial television, we see that sensation becomes the hallmark. Though it is unwelcome, but for public service broadcasters, altruistic tendencies work much better. The Indian story about radio, all of you are aware, it is public service has always been an abiding theme of the stories told over All India Radio. Many compelling stories are regularly told. They are fictional and factual. Public service broadcasters have always been committed to set development and welfare narratives in the country. Era of digital media challenges to public broadcasters. George Monbiot wrote in The Guardian, "Those who tell the stories run the world." Today, in the age of internet, there are multiple digital platforms where millions of stories are created and consumed every day. Who tells the story now? Social media platforms are happy hunting grounds for stories to build and unbuild narratives. It's a double-edged sword while it has potential to democratize the news content by getting subaltern views, it can also manufacture and run false and motivated narratives. C.P. Snow, you must have seen and read, he said, comment is free, but facts are sacred. Infotainment is freely bouncing off satellites into homes with unfettered freedom. A viewer is baffled by this blitzkrieg and doesn't know what to trust. Does the alternate social media represent vox populi and carry greater conviction? Can the content that people at large tend to post on this platform with reckless abundance be ignored altogether? These are the questions, and I think at the end of the session we need to pass a resolution as to what line is to be adopted at least by public service broadcasters, because I understand most of us here, we are public service broadcasters, altruistic by our mandate and not hedonistic. Media has the capability of manipulating the minds of people through biased reporting of men and matters. When political outfits overtly or covertly operate television or radio channels, the inherent danger is partisan outlook. In a market-driven broadcasting system, with increasing emphasis on high ratings and quick pickings, one is not unduly concerned about the credibility. A major challenge is setting reasonable boundaries for telling stories without impinging on freedom of speech and expression. A public service broadcaster needs to be conscious of the fact that development stories it carries to be creditable should capture the ground realities. When the strings of the purse of a broadcasting organization is controlled by extraneous forces, chances often are that it may turn into a covert mouthpiece, which eventually becomes altar for truth. Most of the nations in the region have experienced this at some point of their history. In democracies, coverage of the political theater is a major thrill for all forms of media. Audience look forward to coverage of events and analysis totally devoid of bias. Often in a TRP-driven situation, 24/7 television channels dish out sensational, uncorroborated, manufactured, and motivated content. I'm raising these points because we need to discuss them so that we arrive at a conclusion as to what do we do in the days ahead. In a civilized society, there are accepted canons of decorum, decency, discipline, and dignity. There are reasonable restrictions to deal with sedition, defamation, contempt of court, morality, decency, and security of the state. Overwhelming weight of the judicial opinion in India has been against any attempt to interfere with the freedom of media through the instrumentality of censorship. Social media is known to have the power to trigger social movements for a lofty cause. It can also be used, unfortunately, to sully reputations, but today it cannot be ignored. If mainstream media do not zealously guard their freedom and remain credible through independent and intrepid reporting, social media may push it to the margin by their sexed up content. Now is the second part of what I have to speak, that is post-truth. Post-truth was selected as 2016's International Word of the Year after the Brexit referendum and an equally divisive US presidential election. The Oxford Dictionary, as all of you know, it defines Post-truth as relating to our denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Post-truth has been abetted by the evolution of the media. The fragmentation of news sources has created an atomized world in which lies, rumor, and gossip spread with alarming speed. In post-truth era, lies are widely shared online within a network. Post-truth media really is shifting the news agenda and more subtly than it seems. The pursuit of fairness in reporting often creates a phony balance at the expense of truth. Post-truth challenges are more real than seen on rear-view mirror. Lack of trust in news has, in the past, been mainly a problem of dictatorship and unstable democracies. Unfortunately, it's no longer so. Brexit and US presidential elections stand testimonies to this. Now it touches every society, political system, and country. It has touched the Indian shores too. This crisis is all pervading. World over, the biggest asset for public broadcasters, mainstream media, has been the trust people repose in them. Mainstream media thus always sees itself as the definer of what's true and what's propaganda. In the era of post-factualism that has dissipated in a fog of self-delusion, making people's trust the greatest casualty. With its ever-increasing penetration, social media now plays a crucial role in winning the hearts and minds of voters in the region. Paid trolls, fallacious reasoning, and propaganda gimmicks on Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, etc. are ruling the roost, exceptions notwithstanding. Traditional media, particularly those in the business of serious storytelling, are constantly pushed to the margin. In the post-truth era, exciting currents of social media threaten dissemination of truth. Mainstream media faces this challenge on two fronts, from outside and from within. How to overcome this crisis of faith? President Obama once observed, "Today's story ecosystem means everything is true and nothing is true," unquote. The biggest challenge it poses is to the public service broadcasters. This is very important. Loss of trust on public service broadcasting can create endemic problems of governance and delivery. Once UN Secretary General said, "The onus lies on the political leadership to take lead to restore faith on mainstream media by not manipulating them for petty gains. We need leadership to defend a free media. We need everyone to stand for our right to truth." Mainstream media should not deprecate adventurism for the sake of populism, should have the courage of conviction to stand up to the power and not allow itself to be used as a platform for spreading falsehood or fake news in a post-truth era. Myriad stories told, myriad more to tell, that would endure and continue to engage all forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shuhadar, for a very comprehensive analysis of the problem, I think, that we're facing. Before we move to further presentations, I will be asking some of my colleagues to just talk clearly about how they see the issue of compelling stories and what gets in the way. And I want to start with you, Paula, from a perspective of reporting overseas. What do you see as the challenges?
Thank you very much for having me here today. The last time I was in India was back in 2001. There was an earthquake, if you remember, in Gujarat, in Bhuj. And in those days, I was working for South African television, and we have a large Indian community in South Africa, and they sent a rescue team here to India to try and find survivors. We arrived a week after the earthquake happened, and we were sent to a small rural area where there was a father whose 6 children had all died in the earthquake, and his wife. And he had managed to recover all their bodies except for his 2-year-old daughter. And when we arrived with the rescuers, he came to us with tears in his eyes, and he said, "It's really important for me to be able to set the spirit of my daughter free. Please, can you help me find her body?" And 17 years have passed since that earthquake. And I still remember the name of that little girl. Her name was Jayshree, and we told her story. And I think when you ask what is storytelling, storytelling hasn't changed. Storytelling is storytelling is storytelling. From the time that our ancestors sat around the fire and told stories, we do the same thing today. Except I think what gets in the way, particularly now for those of us that work in the industry, is new media. Ironically, there was this big hysteria that digital media and new social platforms were going to be able to liberate us from the constraints of human storytelling, if you like. And I think there was this whole spike that every story can be told on Twitter, on Facebook, in social media. And I think we've kind of withdrawn from that and realized that just because you have the technology and you know how the technology works doesn't necessarily make you a good journalist. And there's a lot of good journalists out there who tell good stories but don't understand the technology. And I think we must be careful not to think that every story can be told on every social media platform. I can share with you a little bit of our experience at Russia Today. I work as the Middle East Bureau Chief for RT. I'm a war correspondent mostly. We found, firstly, we were the first channel to have 1 billion hits on YouTube. If you go to our YouTube channel, we have 5 billion views on YouTube. So we asked our audiences, what do you want? And we found that our audiences wanted raw, unedited footage. It might be useful for you to know that the audiences are looking for real stories where you're not actually telling them what to think, you're allowing them to think what they want. We use social media, we use a lot of drone footage. When we are in Syria and we can't access certain areas, we'll send our drones in, and we'll use video of an entire city like Homs being completely decimated, and we'll put a little bit of music and maybe a few words, and we'll leave it up to the audience to interpret that how they want. That is the feedback we're getting from our audiences, that they want personalized, raw footage. They don't necessarily want to be told what they need to think in the story. Sarah, you asked the question also, what gets in the way of good storytelling? I think what gets in the way sometimes is we forget who our audiences are. The audience today is very different to who they were. They are consumers of news. They are producers of news. They're actually making news as well. For example, Twitter, it would be difficult to imagine working without Twitter today. But we have to be very careful that when we get our links and our feeds off Twitter, that we know that the stories are genuine and we know who are the people who are posting there. I think another challenge is that the role of the journalist has changed. Today, me as a journalist going to a war zone, I'm no longer perceived as a neutral observer. Very often, I'm perceived as being party to the conflict. And so it's become a lot more dangerous for journalists to work. I remember in that India earthquake, somebody coming up to me and saying, "You're a journalist," and he gave me a piece of paper, and he had a phone number, a British phone number. And he said, "Please phone my sister in England and tell her that I'm okay." This was before social media. He really trusted that a journalist would tell the story, would be able to impart that information. And today I feel more and more we're losing that kind of respect. We're losing that kind of immunity that journalists have. And because it's becoming more dangerous for us, we're affected and not able to tell stories as compellingly as we were able to once.
Thank you. That was a really interesting and first-hand account. I'm going to move now to Shahidul Alam, who has travelled the world telling stories through photos and words. Shahidul, what are your thoughts on the challenges and what gets in the way of telling stories nowadays?
Well, as a photographer, I think I'll use photographs. That's how I communicate. And I think, given a panel such as this, we tend to forget that at the end of the day, we do produce content, and that's what engages. So I'd like, if I may, to go on to the first picture, and I'll give you a little bit of context. This was taken in April 1991. We had a devastating cyclone. I'll talk while we're waiting for the pictures to come up.
Can we get the photographs, please?
And I went up to Pyeongchang, where that's not the right one. I went up to Pyeongchang and arrived at a place which looked completely devastated. Yes, could we have it on full view mode, please? Yes, thank you. So I come across this little girl. She's lost her family, she's lost her home, she's on her own. Sure. It's a sad story, it's a story of devastation, but for me, what was really interesting was not so much her desperation, but the fact that very soon afterwards, while I was concerned about what was happening to her, I found she'd found a new home. There was another family just as destitute, just as desperate, who had embraced another child who needed a home. And the generosity of the poor is something that has always touched me and moved me. And it's a story that's not often told. We present people as victims. We don't give them agency. We don't empower them. And I'll go on further, because when I tried to ask people what had happened that night, people told me things. I talked to government officials, and they talked about how much money they'd given out. I talked to NGO workers, and they talked about how many bags of wheat. I talked to engineers, and they talked about the torque of the wind. But none of that really helped me understand what had happened that night. And I met an old woman in Shundi, and she said, and I'll say it in Bangla the way she said it. She said, Bazan, Zomin holo somuddur, somuddur holo deu. The land became a sea, and the sea became a wave. And suddenly, I knew what had happened that night. I could see the horror of that night in front of me. And often what we do is, as intermediaries, we give ourselves too much importance. And in a sense, it's very close to what Paula was saying. It's that unmediated engagement, the way that someone like this woman in Shundi could reach out and describe something which, in its raw beauty, is so powerful that we often forget to talk about. And I'll move on to another picture, much more recent. This one is in Malaysia, taken very recently. It's can we move on to the next picture, please? This is a woman called Shahnaz. She's a migrant worker in Malaysia. And of course, there are many migrant workers. I mean, today, Bangladesh talks about how well it's doing. We forget the very people who've made our nation what it is. The farmer in the field, the migrant worker, the garment workers, they really are the backbone of our country. They're the ones who've given us this economic independence. But we tend to undermine them. So I talked to Shahnaz, and she's been a migrant worker for about 9 years. She's a single mother. She's left home, when she left, it was a 1-year-old kid. And she'd done well. Her son went to cadet college, which is pretty special for a working class woman in a country like Bangladesh. And she'd sent money back home. They'd bought some land. She says, yes, I'm doing well. I Skype to my son every day. I send him things. He asks for presents. But you know, I left him as a 1-year-old, and I left him with my sister. And today, he called my sister Amma. He calls me Khala. So her sister is mum, and she's auntie. And for me, that was really one of the things that allowed one to engage. Because in a lot of our storytelling, there is this othering. And because there is this othering, we do not humanize the people we talk about. And at the end of the day, while she's a migrant worker, she's also a mother. And the pain of a mother who sacrifices so much for the very son that she's doing it for, having to recognize that the price she pays is the cost of not being called mother, is a very human emotion that I think we need to get across. And I think it is our incapability to tell those stories, the fact that we reduce people to statistics, the fact that we, in trying to get facts across, forget the human element, that we as journalists lose our way as storytellers. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahidul. That was a very timely reminder of the importance of human stories. It's very important and very moving images. We're going to move down the line now to Min Kwok Lim, who's an advisor for communications and information with UNESCO. And I just wondered how UNESCO, slightly to the side of the world of journalism, sees the problems of telling stories in today's society.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm very happy that I'm following Paula's intervention and Shahidul's intervention, because from the perspective of UNESCO, and also touching on what the two speakers have already said, there is something to be said about going back to the basics. I think we have touched a little bit on that, and it is understandable that in this age of communication technology, and everybody chasing after the next new shiny app, that we get lost a little bit in the technology side of it and forget about the core of what we are doing, the telling of the human stories. And we are all vying for the diminishing attention span of your readers, of your audience, of your listeners and viewers. We have all heard the statistics, year after year, the survey shows people no longer have the brand recognition of which company produced, which news outlet produced the news. They would simply say, I read it on Facebook. And less author has a say in it, because more and more the readers are forgetting or not knowing who wrote that article. And of course, there is the question of diminishing revenue. And when we have the combination of the loss of the brand, we have the combination of the loss of the connection between the author and the reader, plus the revenue loss. That combined to give us a sense of panic. And we are chasing after the next way to overcome that panic. So perhaps this is a good time that we regroup and refocus on the core issues of journalism. And there are many ways to do this, and here in this room are some of the best people to do it. All of you here are the one equipped with the training, the actual profession, and the knowledge, and the desire and the passion to do this. And there are at least 4 ways we can engage on these issues of returning to the basics. First of all, ethics, ethical journalism. Going back to the basic, accuracy, transparency, avoiding hate speech on your platform, thinking about the audience, and holding powers in check, ethical journalism. How about digital skills? When was the last time in the past 30 days, let's say, have you learned a new digital skills? We are in the digital age, that's unavoidable. So how do we incorporate that into our work? How do we do data journalism? Is that something that can be incorporated into the daily work? How do we better protect our digital tracks? For journalists working on investigative journalism, safety of their information is an utmost concern. Safety of your sources is an utmost concern. So how do you protect that in the digital environment? How do you improve on sustainability? business models. We had a session this morning talking about a variety of business models. There are different ways nowadays of funding. Traditional way of complete reliance on advertising is a thing of the past nowadays. As we heard, statistics again, Facebook and Google combined, they would take up more than 60% of the global internet advertising revenue. So that leaves very little for the rest. In some ways, this can be done also if the big technology company do invest a little bit more, but that is still not happening. And engagement, this is where the trust comes back in. How do we engage the readers, the viewers, the audience? How do we gain the trust back? How do they know that you will be giving the best information, the correct information? We may need to think about more audience engagement, not just from a perspective of selling advertising slots, but truly engage them and letting them know what is the role of journalism. Because we might think that we all know what is journalist and what is a news, but for those who are really practicing public interest journalism, I think there is a sense that we are missing a little bit the connection between the people who produce the news and the people who consume the news. So that connection, I think, needs to be rebuilt. And these 4 areas are, I think, some of the areas that we can take on in order to go back to the basic and linking to what the fellow speakers have just pointed out just now. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. And yes, very, very much kind of forefront of mind and a reminder to us all around putting the audience at the forefront of the stories we tell. And somebody who's very close to the audience in community radio is Dr. Sridhar Ramamurthy, a former director of the Commonwealth Educational Media Centre for Asia and a community radio practitioner. How does this, talk us through how this affects the community radio sector? Thank you.
It's not moving. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I don't want to take much of your time. At last, the community got a chance to talk. We had bureaucrats, we had politicians, we had commercial people talking about GDPs, advertisement revenue, sustainability, and at least the community has got a chance to speak. I wear so many hats today. I wear the hat of a community only because I had the opportunity or luck, whatever you call it, to start the first campus community radio station in India as way back in 2004. You can see the former Deputy Prime Minister and the very famous lady Chief Minister, and also the Minister who came yesterday, the Minister for IT. And you can also see me there, okay. And then, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that give compelling stories in community media? I believe, okay, this just for the sake of my friends in UNESCO and Commonwealth of Learning, after the first radio station was started, there was a change of government in the country, and the new government did not like community radio. Then it was UNESCO and Commonwealth of Learning put together everybody to talk about community radio. I was just talking to the UNESCO director in Indonesia here, and India is one of the very few countries that have got a very good community radio policy. In Southeast Asia, there are not many. Of course, Bangladesh followed India. After that, you see, the worst thing that has happened in Southeast Asia was the tsunami of 2004. That has given rebirth to the community radio movement in this country. And then the policy was revised, and civil society organizations and agriculture, everybody was given a license. I do see Ms. Supriya Sahu here, who is one of the most proactive bureaucrats of the country who created history in community radio. And the organization that I belong to was also helping the Ministry of Information Broadcasting for 5 years to take the community radio tally to around 150. Today it's around 215 plus. Okay. Now I come to the untold stories. This is a challenge. This is a lady called Vandana Kote. There was a program on health broadcast by a community radio in Maharashtra, and she said, why not I speak on the radio? So she was given a chance. In 1 year later, I find that she was not there in the radio. We found out and went to her house and found out, what are you, sir? I have become so famous. Next election, I am standing for the elections in the local body against a very prominent politician, and she has won. This is a compelling story that is untold, but is in the YouTube. Another compelling story is a rag picker. I wanted to do a drama for my boss. He said, what is community radio? So I said, community radio run by the community, of the community, by the community. So I picked up a rag picker, put her a earphone, and asked her to do a phone-in program. Today, she is the station manager of a community radio station, and it's come on a mainstream newspaper. A compelled story. Another story is a famous transgender person in Bengaluru who has been declared the best anchor person in Bengaluru city, which is the IT city of the country, Pyeongchang. There is a very notorious place where a lot of militancy is there in the country, where the tribal girl is running a radio station without fear. This is another compelling story. And I'm going to come with an economics and then finish my speech. This is the one innovative way of popularizing radio through a kiosk. You know what it is? He is a fruit seller selling it, and he has put the radio Namaskar. Therefore, the policeman will not come and take him away on the road. But the radio station gets publicity. It's a community radio. And there's another story. I think people are from China and other places. A community radio in Maharashtra taught people to grow dragon fruit. They are far more richer than anybody else. They were compelled. They listened to a radio station. This is a story I just wanted to elaborate. This lady was having a number of births. All of them were cesarean. And she was asked to listening to radio on a project of anemia and taking iron tablets, etc., etc. She followed meticulously. You can see a radio there also. And then she avoided a cesarean operation. Even All India Radio may be broadcasting it, public service broadcaster, but they may not know, pinpoint who followed it, who benefited it. She was benefited by 50,000 rupees. She had a normal delivery. If I can save 10 people to have a normal delivery, the whole cost of running a community radio station is there, 500,000 rupees per year. So this compelled link stories and community radio is to be linked with economic prosperity of the person. And this community radio alone can do it, not a commercial broadcaster, like a public broadcaster. They talk in numbers, but where we talk in quality beneficiaries. And I hope these are tribals in Nilgiris. Madam Supriya Sahu must be knowing it. There are only a few thousands of them. They are so traditional. They are holding a microphone and they are getting empowered. This is a story very nearby in Delhi, where there is a particular group which is against immunization, and the radio station helped to create an immunization campaign. I think I don't want to talk about the government of India, but there are 3-4 good schemes are there, subsidy, which was the minister announced yesterday also. They have lots of other ways by which community radio is encouraged here. Advertisement support is given. And we had a lot of workshops, surveillance, bringing all the community radios together. We organized it here. That was a government. In Bangladesh, rules and regulations, if you see, almost 70-80% was from other Indian rules, and then they have improved on it. Bazlur is here. And what we need today is a training. People does not know the difference between public service, commercial, and community broadcasting. We need training institution. And the hope, one of the co-hosts here, Indian Institute of Mass Communication, has set up a community radio empowerment center. I think if it is start functioning well, that's a hope and a wish that empowerment center should serve the Southeast Asia as well. And I welcome all the delegates of this conference to visit any one of our 215 community radio stations and then ask us questions. Then we will talk about our problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a really interesting example of some untold stories, and it made me wonder, perhaps something we can return to when we move to questions, what traditional media can learn from the relationship of community radio with its audience. Finally, we've saved the best till last. We have a presentation from Dr. Ramachandran, Associate Professor in the School of Communication at Taylor's University in Malaysia, and I believe he's going to talk to us about another untold story.
Salam Bahagia, I bring greetings from Malaysia. And my fellow speakers, Chairman Ms. Sarah Gibson, and my great audience today. My story is a case study about the deprivation of essential energy, electricity to villages where authorities and the media chose to look the other way. And technology has become the solution that leverages new forms of storytelling that eventually empowered the masses. Now, before I get there, I believe that storytelling is as old as civilization itself. Some stories have even become epics today, as we witnessed last night in the cultural show on the very same stage here. Ramayana is one of the oldest living stories told in many forms using drama, music, songs, not only to entertain. Lessons from Ramayana, the musical, are staged in the premise of Prambanan as Pura Visata every night since 1976 in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. The bow that you see Rama is carrying is his instrument, significant to the story. The bow and the singing in Villupattu is central to telling stories in villages. What was once confined to a stage has also found its digital form of expression in films today, blending message in drama and music. And who else can tell it better than what you see on the screen? Kamal Hassan. In the recently concluded Annual Media Research 2018, jointly conducted by the University of Taylor's and AIBD, we found, apart from the fact that new media technology enhances storytelling, Asian broadcasters used drama and songs as their popular pathway of impacting their audience. This is some of the results. You can find the book on the way out. Getting back to my story, after 60 years of independence, and we even claim that the tallest twin towers in the world are in Malaysia, we still have villages with no electricity. Now, just 1 year ago, in this very AMS, we talked about SDGs, and the 7th SDG, Strategic Development, which the government promises to the people, essential to human sustenance, was not there in these 3 villages that I'm talking about. In my case, people of 3 villages here in northern Peninsular Malaysia, by the side of a huge lake, at the foothills of the mountains bordering Thailand, they abandoned their homes for years because they could not stay there anymore. Only recently did they decide to come back. As you can see from this map here, the nearest town is 15 kilometers away, and the nearest highway passing by is 5 kilometers away. The villages applied many times to the authorities for electricity. The media again chose to look the other way. The media was not interested in carrying their story. In times like this, as we hear from many other stories of yesteryears, there will always be somebody on horsebacks, a well-endowed man. This man, a modern time savior, came by, realizing that communication technology is galvanizing mass communication to reach greater audience. 3 of his children, this good-hearted man, all their children were mass communication graduates, planned it big, so big to get the story of no electricity out to the capital using social media technology. And what did they do? They invited 100,000 people for a 24 hours Idul Fitri Hari Raya musical and entertainment feast. The people came wandering with their families, the young and old, in large numbers, wanting to know, what is this big story about? What is there in this big story? The family paid, the well-endowed man paid for what technology can buy. They bought the Astro OB-WAN, or rather they hired the Astro OB-WAN for a multimedia coverage to be uploaded to YouTube and 24-hour streaming in Facebook. But of course, they also brought in the generators who supplied 3-phase electricity for the event. Next, to upload, you needed connectivity. As you can see from the picture, that's the area of the event. Maxis was roped in to temporarily build towers to set up. Working through the night, coverage was pushed up to the level, sorry, that detail is very small, pushed up to 3G. Yes, this is before the coverage and after the coverage, 3G coverage. The pathways were jammed because there was an overload, but streaming continued for 24 hours from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. the next day, throughout the night. You may think that it was crazy. The storyteller, a royal descendant, arrived in his usual pomp and festivities, prepping the crowd on his way. 24 hours of entertainment started to be uploaded. Calls started coming in. By then, it was too late. The crowd had already been given with free SIM cards in the thousands to be uploaded, to upload their stories throughout the event until the marketing company ran out of SIM cards. Ghazals, the story was blended with ghazal music and the story of the people's plight, what they wanted, the message to get out and to be heard by the people who should hear it again and again using social media technology, by the people who were affected the most. As you can see the crowd there. There were immediate promises from the higher up. When pictures like this got onto the Facebook, then will electricity come to the village any sooner? Well, electricity did not come, but the elections came. When the elections came, and the elections just concluded 2 days ago, did the incumbent win? Well, that is not part of my story. But the people were not forgiving. They did not forgive the media nor the authorities for their disservice to the community. For all the appeals that fell on deaf ears, the messages got through. The messages were resounding, and it obviously was the technology that has exceeded our humanity. And the moral of my story was, humanity can do, but technology can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an absolutely fascinating story. I'm very pleased that we have still got time for questions, and I hope you've made some notes. I'm just going to start off, but then I would really like to see some hands raised in the audience. And my question was really following off the back of that presentation. I don't know what the panel thinks. That's a very different view of the power of social media and seeing it as something that's stepping in where the traditional journalists had failed. Is there something that we should all be learning from social media rather than seeing it as an intrusion or a source of fake news? Is it a positive or is it a negative? Do you want to start?
There has to be a line of demarcation between conventional broadcasting and the social media. Times have proved that the content on social media is totally at variance with content that we disseminate through terrestrial modes of dissemination. Now, the handling of two media, the content of the two media platforms, and that is also very different. And the audience also is different. Social media has its set of audience, and terrestrial broadcasting or conventional broadcasting has an audience which is different from that. Now, what we tend to do is that we want to sensationalize a certain thing and try to make it more sellable and catch eyeballs. Now, the casualty is the truth. Today's session is basically aimed at post-truth and the compelling stories. We do not find reasons to have so much of an entertaining attitude towards the falsehood than the real stories. Now, market-driven societies have created media units, media platforms. that creates a certain problem for those who want the media to tell them what exactly has happened and how it has been reported. That is not happening in the social media. So that line of demarcation has to be drawn between the two.
Thank you. Are there any other views from the panel? On social media, opportunity or threat?
I think we worry about it unnecessarily. They represent different spaces, each has its strength, and one needs to use it. I mean, as a photographer, I constantly come across people who complain about the fact that it's no longer the way it used to be, and you no longer have the spreads, and how do we have relevant? If the media landscape has moved, we need to adapt to it. I think the reality is that we need to be as nimble as practitioners, as the media itself around us, and they have different strengths. But one of the things which originally was talked about, I think, is significant. Now, obviously, when the average person has the media in his or her hands, they have a power which they didn't before. I think that is to be celebrated. The reverse of that is that it's not monitored, it's not evaluated, and how does one vet for its authenticity? I think authenticity relies upon trust. And whether it's an individual or whether it's a mega media, at the end of the day, it's whether they've been able to establish their trust and their credibility that matters. And whoever is able to do that is the person who will be believed. Lewis Hine in 1909 had said, while photographs may not lie, liars may take photographs. I think liars today can be presidents, can be radicals, can be revolutionaries, and in their hands they have tools that can do all the things that they were able to do before and more. In the end, whether they will be believed or not is whether they have, over a period of time, established their credibility or not, and that is the principal concern.
Any thoughts from the audience?
Yes. I am Tyagarajan from Indian Public Service Broadcaster. My question is to the entire panel. Why don't we hear much of positive stories nowadays? Is it easier to tell a negative story in more compelling manner than a positive story? And I have another question. Is it that all stories or all truths must be told? How do you tell an embarrassing truth without causing much of social uproar? Thank you.
Can you just repeat the second question? I got the first one, but I didn't get the second.
Is it necessary that all stories or truths must be told? How do you tell an embarrassing truth without causing much of social uproar?
Good question. Okay, well that actually is, I think, possibly to Dr. Ramachandran, because that was an embarrassing truth.
Thank you. Embarrassing truth in the sense that, you see, poor people, they don't have the means to ask. But when they ask, you better listen. You see, you don't come to listen to the plight of the poor people 5 years once. Repeatedly asking was denied. And why did the media look the other way? That's a question the media had to answer. I do not want to answer that question here. It's embarrassing to the media. But the truth is, the people chose an alternative way. Not only in my story last year, but 2 days ago, we saw the truth in Malaysia, where the alternative or the opposition party did not have the public media or the official media to voice the grievances. And the people answered for the opposition. So, media people must believe that there is no monopoly, and it is not, the world doesn't belong to any one single person. So there are always other avenues of appealing and telling the story. So the truth got out, and the incumbent lost.
And do you feel that, I'm taking it that you feel that the media dropped the ball on that story, that they should have done better? Dr. Ramachandran.
Pardon?
I'm taking it that you feel the media dropped the ball on that story, that they should have done better, the traditional media.
Yes. again, my hands and lips are tied. You see, I cannot talk about the official media in a public forum like this. But I know for certainty that having come from the media for a very long time, serving the official media, our hands are really tight. We go by the mandate, as our first speaker spoke from All India Radio. We go by the mandate. We have our masters, and we go by our policies. So the coverage tend to get more and more lopsided. And therefore, the majority voice may not be have heard. Although the majority voice, I feel, may not be always right.
Okay. Paula, just on the question around positive versus negative stories, because the media does get accused a lot of telling negative stories. What's your view?
The point raised is 100% accurate. I mean, we know that bad news sells. I call myself a war correspondent. I don't call myself a peace correspondent, unfortunately. And I think it's part of a bigger discussion. Are we reflecting what the audiences want to read, what they want to watch, or are we telling them what they should watch? Because the fact that bad news sells is just because it does sell. So we will cover those stories because we know that there is a commercial value to telling those stories, that people want to hear those stories. So, you know, I've over the years thought about telling different stories, but you find that you don't get that kind of interest from stories when there's no drama, when there's no guts and gory details. I wanted to also comment about the earlier point about social media. Another discussion that we're having amongst journalists ourselves is how social media has changed the role of journalists. Do I still need to go to a war zone like Syria and risk my life to tell the story, or can we just rely on photographs that come out on social media? And the reality is that by the time I get to Syria, the story is already shifted, and the photographs that came out online can only be taken by people who are living in the situation. And so I think we're changing our definition of what it means to be a journalist. Perhaps we don't always need to be on-the-ground reporting. Perhaps there's a role for journalism that's more what we spoke about, verifying information, confirming information. But I do want to also share with you that what we have found at RT is that there's still a value for being on-the-spot reporting. And again, we've done research on this, and our audiences tell us that they still want to have a journalist that they trust, who is there and who is telling the story. So I think social media has brought with it various challenges of opportunities of telling new stories. But again, to what some of us were saying earlier, is that traditional storytelling still remains the most important, where it's a traditional journalist telling a traditional story.
Thank you. Are there any more comments from the floor? Any questions? I know it's nearly lunchtime. Can I ask Min Kwok Lim, in this kind of age of a certain amount of uncertainty around truth, so, you know, post-truth era, fake news, people's trust in what they read and consume has somewhat been shaken. What can the journalistic and media community do to re-establish that trust?
Well, such a tough question, that one. Okay, let's see. I'd like to throw a challenge to everybody here. It's always good that we have something to do, and harkens back to the time when I was still teaching, so I'm giving out some homework here. So for everybody here, when you go back, and these are some of the actions that you can immediately take, some of you may have already checked all the boxes, some of you may not. So let's do this exercise. First, when you go back, take a look in your own newsroom. If the newsroom has a code of ethics display, is it easily accessible by each and every one of you? Does the code of ethics include gender-sensitive component on it? 2, does your newsroom or yourself have a safety protocol? And this relates to what Paula was talking about, the danger of news reporting. But danger comes in different forms. And let's be frank about this. Sexual harassment happens in and outside of the newsroom. So does your newsroom has that kind of protocol in place? places with a war situation, or you are going to cover war situation, naturally requires different types of safety protocols. But if you are covering post-disaster situation, a typhoon, let's say, then it's a different situation. So does your newsroom have that kind of policy? Do you have insurance coverage? Third, do you have, or does your organization have an engagement policy with your audience? If not, why? If yes, is there any good examples that we can learn from that? Are you engaging the audience, engaging the journalism students, for example, or engaging the civil society? Often we heard from the civil society that we can't get information out or in. So 3 things. Whether you have the code of ethics well displayed in your newsroom. Second, do you have a safety protocol? Third, do you have an audience engagement plan? So some of the things that we can go back and immediately double check whether it is in place or not.
And that's in the same vein as going back to basics, isn't it? Question from the audience here. Can you wait for the mic? Can you take the mic?
I don't, yeah. Sarah, I am Manas. I'm from the public service broadcaster in India. My question relates to community radio. Will community radio and the conventional radio be 2 different worlds? And one particular question I always have in mind is that will career options at the community radio station be an attractive one for city-bred journalism students? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Manas. The question cannot be answered because community radio is in its teens now. So career options will come a little later. But I have always been of the view that our Sharia public broadcaster, commercial broadcaster, I think maybe Apurva will be here in the evening, and then community broadcaster should coexist. Use our infrastructure, use our talents, and then it should coexist. It cannot be competing to each other. That should be the thing. Take the best of community radio to public service broadcasting. What public service broadcaster cannot do it in prime time, let the community radio do it. That should be some kind of an understanding. There is no point in having 3 different tires fighting for the same pipe.
Okay, do you want to? Would you like to, I think we've got a follow-up point to your question over there. Would you like to?
Mr. Tyagarajan asked, he was finding the content of today different from content when he was a child or he was a young man. See, we have started serving a market-driven society. Unfortunately, in most of the media, content is dictated by the market. Now, in such a situation, you only produce a thing which is sellable. Earlier, the situation was absolutely different. It used to be a content, a program aimed at entertaining and informing a citizen without being worried how much money it will give you back. So that is why you are finding content of today different from content of yesteryears.
Thank you. Any other final points from the audience? Otherwise, I will go back to the panel for one last thought. But any questions? Hands up? No hands up? I can't see. No. Okay. So I just to round up, I would like to ask you all to think about the younger audience. So the stories that we tell are, you know, we think they're very compelling, but I think, you know, the younger audience are not necessarily engaging with traditional media in the way that we would have when we grew up. And I think that does pose it's an existential challenge, actually, for journalists and media. So I wonder if I could just get your final thoughts on what we need to change to engage younger audiences with our storytelling. We'll start here.
Compelling story is not necessarily based on facts. It's based on what attracts the attention of the audience. Now, a compelling story can be based on facts, or it can be only a sensation that becomes sellable, or it enhances TRP or the ratings of a certain broadcast platform. So under these situations, one fails to understand as to whether we are serving a society or we are only running a shop.
Thank you. Paula, any thoughts about the younger audience? Are they still as interested in foreign coverage?
I don't think younger audiences are as interested in traditional media, although I do think they still are interested in foreign coverage. There's been research into that as well, and have found that there's a perception maybe that millennials are not that interested in international news, but actually they are. I think the challenge to us who work in more traditional media is to bridge the gap, is to listen to our audiences more, so to go onto the platforms that they're using, to understand the kind of stories that they're accessing and are interested in, and to appeal to them. Most of our audience actually at RT is a young audience, and we get most of our audience online and not through our television networks. And they love being engaged. They love feeling that they're important. They love the idea that you're listening to them, you're asking them for feedback, and you're taking suggestions from them on how to tell stories and what stories to tell. So I think it's about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and incorporating as much of the younger audiences as you can with your traditional media.
Yeah, I think we've become complacent. We've gotten away with things for a very long time and developed bad habits. Traditional audiences did not have a choice. Younger audiences do. And because they do, they will go away they think they'd like to go. And I think we need to respond to that. We need to ensure that our work actually reaches out. They have shorter attention spans, but they also have curiosity. And I think we need to play on that. And I'd like to come back to what the original questionnaire had brought up, in terms of positive stories not having as much mileage. Sure, as news, if it bleeds, it leads is something that we know in the media. But I think it's also true that we tend to simplify things. We tend to go for the easier catch, the sound bites, and we feed prejudices, which are easy, which are stereotyped. Positive stories are often softer stories. Longer-term stories require a greater engagement and a more complex way of dealing with it in order to be able to package it in a way which is still attractive. And that requires work. And we haven't done that. We've become lazy. And I think one of the good things that has happened, because younger audiences are fickle in our terms, is that they have forced us to rethink our strategy and ensure that we stay relevant. The big difference is there is now an audience that wants its own voice, that wants to be empowered, that wants to have a say. And it's about time media, traditional media at least, responded to that.
Thank you. Min Kwok Lim, thoughts on younger audiences?
I think one of the things that we shouldn't think, which is to underestimate the youth. I think the youth has a strong, especially the younger of the youth group, has a very strong capacity to absorb a wide variety of issues. And it's about the issues that can engage them. There's a study that have said that the digital natives nowadays, well, because they are used to the technology, they are able to absorb a lot more and a lot faster. So it is actually the older generation that couldn't keep up with them, not the other way around. And we shouldn't underestimate them, that we think that we need to dumb down the materials, that we need to make them less long or less complex. They can take the complexity of it. But just to mirror what Shahidul have said, it is our job to package it in a more attractive way. But the issue is still an attractive issue, and they will engage on the topic. And it is not just because it's an international issue that they are not interested. They are only interested about what's happening in their local context. That's not true. They are capable of absorbing a complex matter, complex issues, and they're willing to engage on it.
Okay, thank you. Just 1 second before I carry on down the table. I've got somebody with their hand up over here.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from the India's public service broadcaster, and I'm very new to the profession. It's just been 3 years, but I won't say it on behalf of the younger audience, but I do consider myself young comparatively. My question is it, are we not stereotyping the younger audience, saying that, yes, they would not comply with what was the traditional media or the platform, and they are all into social media and all the buzz which is happening? Whatever is happening is, so we are kind of restructuring ourselves in terms or pertaining to the needs of the younger audience. But being a younger audience myself, and into the broadcaster and future of broadcasting as I see it, I would be interested in what traditional media was, what was the content of it. So if I am a parent, I'm a senior buddy and senior person in my family, and I have a younger child at home, would I just give in to his whims and fancies? Okay, so you are wanting a pizza or a burger and I do not agree. So I just mend myself according to the needs of the younger one, or I just groom and expose to what was old and what was traditional and eternal?
So, sadly, I get the feeling that we're running out of time. No?
This is for all those who want to go for Friday prayers. There's a bus waiting at the lobby. If there are some of you who want to go for Friday prayers, they're leaving just now. So I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. I still think we probably haven't got the time to go into answer that question in the depth that it would deserve, and I hope we're not stereotyping. I think actually, if you, the organisation that I worked for until recently, can just see that it's losing, it's not engaging with the younger audience. So that is a threat, I guess, to the traditional media. But it's interesting what the colleagues have talked about. Actually, they are very much interested and keen. And we shouldn't be dumbing down coverage. So I think, but we can certainly talk about it more in the break. Let's finish the final thoughts. Thank you.
I just wanted to give you an invitation to visit 3 types of people, young people, who are rag pickers, who are weavers, who are tailors, who listen to a traditional radio today. They can't afford to watch a television or a social media. They can't afford to have a playlist on their cell phone. They listen to a radio. And if the radio compels him to listen to increase his productivity, to increase his value, there are examples today. So as the younger colleague says, why are we stereotyping it? I can show you in Delhi today, youngsters, 18 years, 20 years, who are rag pickers, who listen to a radio if it is going to give them a little more, $1 or 1 penny more by listening to the program. So we can also think of that instead of making them spend, we can make them earn also.
Thank you. And Dr. Ramachandran, final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Compelling story, I believe that it is the distance between the teller and the audience. So this distance between the teller and the audience is made relative and real with the entry of new media. New media with its novelties, its urgencies, and its capacities had gapped the deficiency, or I wouldn't say deficiency, what traditional media could not do in today's environment. New media has filled in that gap. And coming back, that is the distance that has been narrowed by new media. So it is the relative distance that causes the engagement and the effect of the story to the audience.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank you all for listening and for spending your time. with us here today. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I'd like you to join me in thanking our panellists, Mr. F. Shahriar, Director General of All India Radio, Paula Slayer, Middle East Bureau Chief of RT, Shahidul Alam, photographer, Ming Kwok Lim from UNESCO, Dr. Sridhar Ramamurthy from Community Radio in India, and Dr. Ramachandran, Professor at Taylor's University in Malaysia. Thank you all very much.
We thank Sarah Gibson for conducting that session. I'd like to request Mr. George Kurvilla, CMD Bessel, to please come up and present a memento of the occasion to everyone. Madam Sarah Gibson. Dr. Sridhar Ramamurthy, Mr. Shahriar, Dr. Shahidul Alam, Dr. Ramachandran Ponan, Ms. Paula Slayer, and Dr. Lim Ming. And before all of you leave the dais, may I request you to come to the front of the dais for a quick group photograph of the panel. While they're being photographed, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for lunch, which is being served in the...
You just watched the third plenary session of the Asia Media Summit 2018. It was a joint session on telling compelling stories, challenges and opportunities, radio and community radio. Post-lunch, there'll be two more plenary sessions, one on sustainable development stories and then on what constitutes success of media. But we'll be back by 5:15 in the evening with the presentation of the World Television Awards 2018. Thank you.